Chapter 6 of The Romance of Modern Engineering. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Romance of Modern Engineering by Archibald Williams. Chapter 6. American Bridges. The second place among monster bridges is held by the Brooklyn Suspension Bridge, connecting Manhattan Island, on which stands New York proper, with Long Island. Previously to 1883, New York, with its population of 2 millions, and Brooklyn, counting 1 million inhabitants, were kept in communication across a narrow strait, 12 miles long, opening into Long Island Sound, known as the East River, by a number of steam ferries, one of which alone transports 22 million foot passengers and 1,100,000 vehicles annually. With the growth of population, the absence of some permanent connection between the two islands was so severely felt that it was determined to link the two with a bridge of such a height above the water as to offer no obstruction to the shipping passing down the Sound to New York Harbor. The spot selected for the bridge is at the southern end of the East River Strait, where it narrows down to a width of rather more than 1/4 of a mile. In deciding on the suspension type, American engineers had 2 good precedents: the Ohio River and Clifton suspension at Niagara, which then held the record in point of span. The Ohio Bridge at Cincinnati had a clear leap of 1,000 feet, while that at Niagara measured 1,268 feet between the centers of the towers, standing on either side of the gorge below the falls. This bridge, opened to traffic in 1869 as a result of but 12 months' work, hung from 2 cables 1,888 feet long, passing over rollers on the summit of the towers, which were built of wood strengthened by massive iron frames. The cables each contained 931 wires, 1/7 inch diameter, twisted into 7 ropes. When loaded with an average amount of traffic, the bridge weighed 360 tons. To prevent excessive lateral oscillation, strong steel guy ropes were strung from various points on the structure to anchorages on the side of the gorge. After standing and doing useful service for many years, the bridge was destroyed by one of the tremendous hurricanes that periodically sweep down the Niagara Gorge as through a funnel. There remained, however, the Niagara Railway Suspension Bridge, completed in 1855. This has a span of 821 feet, the track passing 245 feet above the river. It should be explained that the lower chord of the bridge is a girder with 2 floors, the upper of which carries the railroad, while the lower serves for foot and ordinary vehicular traffic. As originally constructed, 2 masonry towers bore the weight of the 4 cables, each containing 3,640 iron wires that support the girder. After 26 years of wear, it was discovered that these towers had been bent inwards to a dangerous extent, owing to the rollers on which the cable saddles work at the tower tops having become clogged with cement. The engineers therefore built iron skeleton towers outside the masonry, and without in any way interrupting the traffic of the bridge, transferred the cables from the stone to the iron supports by means of powerful hydraulic jacks. This is a most interesting feat and probably unique. When the bridge was in course of construction, Robert Stephenson, engaged on the Victoria Tubular Bridge at Montreal, said to the designer of the Niagara suspension, Mr. John A. Roebling, "If your bridge succeeds, mine is a magnificent blunder." The light American structure did succeed. The Brooklyn Bridge, like that at Niagara, is carried on 4 main cables. The supports are 2 huge towers rising 272 feet above high water. At the river level, they measure 140 feet broad by 50 deep, which dimensions decrease to 120 by 40 feet at the summit. On the New York side, the masonry is carried down to rock 78 feet below water level, giving the tower a total height of 350 feet. The masonry built into the 2 towers aggregated 85,000 cubic yards. The central span is 3,640 feet. Between the towers and the anchorages are 2 930-foot spans, and beyond these approaches that add 2,534 feet to the total length, 5,989 feet, or about a mile and a furlong. The most interesting feature of the bridge is the cable work. Each of the 4 cables anchored at either end to massive 23-ton plates embedded in huge masses of masonry, each representing more than 44,000 tons, contains 5,296 galvanized steel wires, which were carried separately from tower to tower and bound up together in a parallel formation into a cylinder 15 3/4 inches in diameter. The breaking strain of a cable is 12,000 tons. As each strand is 3,572 feet long, about 1,200 miles of wire were used in the cables. These support 6 parallel steel trusses, on which is laid the roadway, 85 feet wide, divided into 2 carriage tracks, 2 tramways, and 1 footway. The bridge rises towards its center on a gradient of 3.25%, the headway increasing from 119 feet at the towers to 135 in mid-channel. The bridge cost $15 million, 2/3 of which was contributed by the Brooklyn municipality and 1/3 by that of New York. It was begun in 1870 and opened to the public in 1883. Upwards of 250,000 people cross the bridge daily, but so great is the traffic between Manhattan and Long Island that 3 more bridges are in course of construction across the East River. These will, when completed, be in the first rank of such structures and formidable competitors in regard to size with the Brooklyn Bridge. A traveler to the United States is struck by the versatility of the American bridge builder, whose genius develops most happily towards the erection of light, airy viaducts spanning many of the valleys through which the great network of railways run. The States have now nearly 200,000 miles of track laid, and on the average there is 1 span of metallic bridge for every 3 miles of railway, giving a total of over 63,000. The increase in weight of locomotives and rolling stock has led to the renewal of many of these bridges by the substitution of more substantial work, and the rapid extension of existing systems constantly demands the manufacture of new bridges. Consequently, the demand has driven manufacturers to standardize their patterns and arrive at a distinct understanding with the railway engineers that, except in special cases where divergence is unavoidable, all bridges ordered shall conform to certain stereotyped designs, which have been decided upon after much experimentation. The American bridge building companies, thanks to this scientific arrangement and the large number of orders that they are called upon to fill, have advanced the practice of bridge making to a point that enables them to compete favorably with the manufacturers of other countries. The Yankee railway engineer gives measurements to the bridge company, which by long practice knows just what is required to meet a particular case, and turns its mechanics, armed with all manner of labor-saving tools, on to cheaply made steel. In a few weeks or months the bridge is ready for delivery, the makers confident that when the pieces are assembled in situ they will come together like a clock. Very probably the company does the erecting as well, so that after the order is given, the railway board's part of the work is confined to handing over a check to the proper amount when the bridge has been passed by their engineers. On American railroads, the trestle bridge is a very common object, often towering to a giddy height that dwarfs the giant locomotives passing overhead. In 1890, there were in the States 147,187 wooden trestle spans, aggregating 2,127 miles of track. These, as liable to insidious decay and danger from fire, are being replaced by steel structures as fast as is possible. A notable instance is the Portage Viaduct on the Erie Railway, New York, crossing a river 234 feet above the bed. The old viaduct contained more than 1.5 million feet of timber, arranged in piers formed of 3 grouped trestles. This was burned in 1875, and in its stead now stands a remarkably slender-looking viaduct of wrought iron, weighing but a small fraction of the wooden structure. The same railway boasts another remarkable viaduct, the Kinzua, 2,400 feet long and 305 feet high. It was built by Messrs. Clark, Reeves and Company in the short space of 3 months, without the use of any staging or ladders. The original spider-like supports have recently been replaced by steel trestles of a more solid nature, better calculated to sustain the great increase of rolling stock weight. Outside the country of its birth, the American bridge is making headway. In recent years, British builders have several times felt their inability to compete with their transatlantic cousins when creation and erection has to be hurried through. To take 3 notable examples, the Attleborough Bridge, 7 spans of 147 feet, was tendered for by American makers at £10, 13 shillings, 6 per ton, construction to take 6 weeks and erection 8 weeks. The nearest English tender showed £15, 15 shillings per ton and 26 weeks. The Uganda viaducts, East Africa, also fell to American makers, since their price was but 3/5 of the English figures. And in the third instance, that of the Gokteik Viaduct, Burma, their price was little more than half that of British makers, and the contract time 1 year as against 3 years. These examples show how unequal is the competition, owing largely to the conservatism of English methods and the imbecilities of trades unionism in the British Isles. To keep his end up, the British manufacturer will need to consign much of his machinery to the scrap heap, adopt standard designs, and instill a spirit of greater enterprise into his employees. The Gokteik Viaduct, as the loftiest trestle erection in the world and among the latest born, deserves special notice. It affords a typical illustration of American methods. The Burma Railway, running from Rangoon to Mandalay, a distance of about 400 miles, has lately been extended in an easterly direction through the Shan states to Lashio en route to the Kunlun Ferry on the Salween River, following the track over which in Marco Polo's time the Chinese armies marched to Mandalay. 80 miles east of the latter town is the Gokteik Gorge, with an average depth of 1,300 feet, eaten out by the Changzhou River. It was first proposed to cross this formidable obstacle by means of short rack railways on the apt principle which should lower trains from the high ground to a point in the gorge where huge blocks of limestone have fallen into the glen to form a natural bridge 500 feet above the river. A viaduct 80 feet high and 500 feet long would suffice for the crossing. Eventually, it was decided to flatten the grades of the approaches to 1 in 40 and raise the viaduct level to over 300 feet above the natural bridge. It should be said of the approaches themselves that they pass through very rough country where the gradients are too steep to admit of curves. By means of switchback reversing stations every 2 or 3 miles, the train clambers slowly upwards in a zigzag course on the edge of awful precipices. On the eastern side of the gorge, the line still sticks to steep hillsides, passes through 2 tunnels and heavy cuttings, and then twists upwards by help of 3 semicircular loops. The viaduct was designed by Sir Alexander Rendell and Company, consulting engineers to the Burma Railways Company. The contract fell to the Pennsylvania Steel Company of Steelton. Our American cousins, said Sir Frederick Pryor, Lieutenant Governor of Burma, at the opening ceremonies, obtained the contract because they were able to submit a far more favorable tender than any English firm, both in point of cost and of time. Within 4 months of the signing of the contract, the first shipload of material was dispatched from New York. 2 months later it arrived at Rangoon. The transport of 4,332 tons of steel over a line that had suffered severely from the 15-foot rainfall of the wet season was much delayed, but in spite of obstacles, erection commenced in October. To facilitate the classification and separation of the various parts and the handling of them by ignorant natives, each truss, girder, and column was painted a distinctive color, and the joints, when shop assembled, were streaked with special combinations of stripes on each adjacent piece. Along with the bridge material came pneumatic reamers and riveting hammers, hoisting engines, derricks, telephones, and last, but by no means least, 35 American workmen. To aid in the erection, a temporary line was laid in zigzags down the side of the gorge. This carried material to the foot of the viaduct and also helped the transport of rails, sleepers, and even 2 locomotives in pieces to the further side, where 35 miles of track were laid during the construction of the viaduct. From Steelton to Gokteik is 10,599 miles, an almost, if not quite, unprecedented distance to send the ready-made-up parts of so large a structure. As fast as the metal arrived at the bridge end, it was whipped out of the meter-gauge cars by great steam derricks, which handed them over to smaller derricks for sorting and storage. At times, the press of work was so heavy that the trucks, immediately they were emptied, were picked up by the 15-ton crane and set down on the bank in piles many feet below the track to make way for loaded cars. As soon as sufficient stuff had accumulated, the traveler was erected at the south end of the bridge. This machine, which plays so important a part in American bridge building and is largely responsible for the celerity of operations, is a large framework, the rear end of which is anchored to a completed section of the structure, while the forward and larger part overhangs and acts as a crane through which parts of the next section are lowered into place. The Gokteik Traveler was 24.5 feet wide, 60 feet high, and 219 feet long, with an unprecedented overhang of 165 feet. Cars running along the track transferred joists and trusses to the running tackle, which quickly let them down and held them in position while the riveters, mostly natives, fixed them. Some British and German sailors proved very useful on the Traveler and topmost points of the rising towers, and set a very wholesome example to the 350-odd coolies engaged. Now for a few figures about the bridge. Its total length from abutment to abutment is 2,260 feet. For 281 feet at one end and 341 at the other, it is curved to a radius of 800 feet. The intermediate 1,638 feet runs tangentially in a straight line at a height varying between 130 and 320 feet above the natural bridge and valley slopes. There are 17 spans, 10 120 feet long, 7 60 feet long. The 15 trestles or towers, each of 4 columns with one exception, are 24.5 feet broad at top and widen towards the bottom with a batter of 5 24. The trestle is 40 feet long and is divided into stories 35 feet high, which are braced diagonally. At the highest point of the viaduct over the natural bridge, there is a double tower 80 feet long with 6 columns 320 feet high. The 120-foot girders are of the lattice type, the 60 and 40-foot plate-sided, 42.5 and 60.25 inches deep, respectively. The viaduct will eventually carry a double track besides a footwalk for pedestrians. At present, accommodation for the footwalk in one set of rails only has been provided. The other girders and trusses necessary for completion will be added at some future time. The men worked from 7 to 12 a.m. and 1:45 to 6 p.m., except on such days as the furious monsoon blew through the gorge, or the heavens emptied themselves in deluges of rain. Under favorable conditions, the structure rose with astonishing speed, some of the 200-foot towers going up in 3 or 4 days. The double tower consumed a month, as its immense height rendered construction more dangerous and consequently less easy. As soon as a tower was finished, the big girders for the space intervening between it and that on which the traveler rested were swung out and fixed. Then followed horizontal stringers, cross-floor beams, ties, and rails. These placed, The huge 100-ton framework rolled forward to the end of the new span and commanded another masonry pier whence a new tower soon began to rise. On November 1st, 1900, after 9 months' labor, the last of the 200,000 field rivets was driven, and the Gokteik viaduct stood complete. As 800,000 rivets had already been closed in the shops, the total shows just 1 million. It is a striking testimony to the thoroughness of American workmanship that 232,868 separate pieces shipped from Steelton fitted with wonderful accuracy when assembled in the gorge. The bridge cost the railway company £60,125, and it is considered that they have received good value for their money. Englishmen naturally regret that so important a contract should have passed into alien hands, but they will not grudge the praise due to the pushful American for a fine work, skillfully and quickly performed. End of chapter 6.